Think about last night. You got into bed, you lay down, you closed your eyes. And then, somehow, it was morning. Somewhere between those two moments, hours disappeared. Not blurred, not half-remembered, disappeared. There is no memory of the night slowly fading away. No final image you can hold on to. No last clear thought preserved like a bookmark in your mind. One moment, you were awake, maybe thinking about tomorrow, maybe replaying something embarrassing you said 3 years ago, maybe wondering why your brain always decides bedtime is the perfect moment to review your entire life. And then nothing. Cut to black. Morning. The strange part is not that you slept. The strange part is that you cannot remember the exact moment you stopped being there. You do not remember your final thought before sleep took over. You do not remember the last second your eyes felt heavy. You do not remember crossing the border between awake and not awake. And that should bother you a little. Because this is not rare. You do this every night. You spend roughly a third of your life asleep, which means you have fallen asleep thousands and thousands of times. More times than you have eaten breakfast. More times than you have opened your phone and immediately forgotten why. So be now. You would think you know what falling asleep feels like. Not the part before sleep. Not being tired. Not lying there in the dark. The actual moment, the instant where I am awake becomes something else. But you do not know it. No one really does. Every night, your mind walks toward that edge. And every night, the record cuts out before you can see yourself cross it. So, what is happening? The easy answer would be, you forget. But that is too simple. Forgetting sounds like there was a memory first. And then your brain lost it later. Like a file that was saved somewhere and then accidentally deleted? That is not what seems to happen. The more unsettling answer is that your brain may never properly records the moment at all. Because falling asleep is not just you becoming unconscious. It is your brain slowly dismantling the very systems that would allow you to notice, understand, and remember what is happening. To see why, we have to begin before the blackout. Not in the dream, not in deep sleep, but in the final minutes of wakefulness, when you are still technically there. But the machinery behind you is already changing. All day, your brain has been burning energy. Every thought, every sound, every movement, every tiny decision costs something. And as your brain spends energy, one of the chemicals that builds up in the background is called adenosine. Adenosine is not dramatic. It does not arrive all at once. It accumulates slowly, hour after hour. Like a quiet debt your brain keeps adding to the bill. The longer you stay awake, the heavier that debt becomes. And adenosine has one job that matters here. It pushes against wakefulness. It does not knock you out like a switch. It leans on the systems that keep you alert. It makes your thoughts slower, your body heavier, your attention less sharp. This is why, after a long day, even doing nothing can feel like work. This is also why caffeine feels like magic. Coffee does not actually erase your tiredness. It blocks adenosine receptors, which means your brain cannot properly read the signal saying, "You are exhausted." You are not suddenly full of energy. You are just briefly hiding the bill from the part of your brain that collects payment. Useful, suspicious, very human. But adenosine is only one piece. At the same time, your circadian rhythm, your internal 24-hour clock, is shifting the entire system toward night. Deep inside the brain, a tiny region of the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus helps keep that clock aligned. As darkness approaches, alerting signals begin to drop. The pineal gland releases melatonin. Body temperature lowers slightly. Your brain chemistry starts tilting. not falling, tilting, away from wakefulness, toward sleep. And this is where the situation becomes more than just being tired. Because your brain is not passively waiting for sleep to happen. It starts pushing wakefulness out. A small cluster of neurons in the hypothalamus, called the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus, begins suppressing the arousal systems that keep you awake. The signals that maintain alertness, norepinephrine, serotonin, histamine start getting quieter. The brain is not losing a battle. It is negotiating its own shutdown. And during this negotiation, something strange happens to your sense of time. Minutes stretch. Thoughts become softer at the edges. You may still believe you are awake. You may still hear the room. You may still feel the bed under you. But the system is already changing underneath awareness. This is why the missing moment is so difficult to catch. You are trying to observe a process using a brain that is actively becoming worse at observation. You are trying to remember a transition using a memory system that is already being pulled offline. The closer you get to sleep, the less capable you become of recording the fact that you are getting closer. It is like standing in a room while the lights dim one by one, and being asked to describe the exact instant darkness begins. At first, you can still see, then you can sort of see, then the room is gone. But there was no single frame where the world announced, "This is the last moment." That is the trap. Falling asleep feels like it should have a border, a clean line, awake on one side, asleep on the other. But the brain does not cross that line all at once. It approaches it in pieces. Chemistry changes first. Alertness weakens. Attention loosens. The sense of being a clear, continuous self begins to thin out, and somewhere in that thinning, the witness starts to fade. So when you wake up in the morning, it feels like nothing happened. But something did happen. A full biological transition took place. Your brain prepared the body, lowered the alert systems, changed the chemistry of consciousness, and began moving you toward a state where the outside world would soon stop being forwarded in the same way. The reason you do not remember the missing moment is not because the moment was empty. It is because the brain was already beginning to take apart the recorder. And in the next part, the recorder does not just weaken, the gate closes. And that gate has a name: the thalamus. Under normal waking conditions, your thalamus is one of the most important relay stations in your brain. Almost everything you see, hear, feel, and sense has to pass through it before it reaches the cortex, the outer layer of the brain that helps turn raw signals into conscious experience. A sound in the room, the pressure of the pillow under your head, the faint glow behind your eyelids, the feeling of fabric against your skin. All of it is being routed, filtered, forwarded. The thalamus is not just letting the world in, it is helping decide what parts of the world become part of your experience. And while you are awake, that relay is open. Not perfectly open. The brain is always filtering, but open enough that the outside world keeps arriving. That is why you can hear a car pass outside and know it was a car. Why you can feel your blanket and know it is a blanket. Why a sudden sound can pull your attention across the room before you even decide to look. Your cortex is being fed a constant stream of reality. But as sleep begins, that stream changes. The thalamus starts to shift into a different mode. A structure called the reticular thalamic nucleus begins inhibiting the thalamus's relay cells, slowly reducing the flow of sensory information to the cortex. In simple terms, the gatekeeper starts turning people away. The room is still there. The air conditioner is still humming. A phone might buzz on the table. A dog might bark somewhere outside. But less of that information is being sent upstairs to the part of you that can consciously experience it. The world has not gone silent. Your brain has started refusing the delivery. And this matters because memory does not form from nothing. To create a clear memory, the brain needs information. It needs sensory input, attention, and a system awake enough to bind the moment together. When the thalamic gate begins to close, the cortex gets less data, less sound, less touch, less detail, less context. And without enough input, the cortex cannot build a clean, stable scene. It cannot say, "This is what is happening right now," with the same clarity it had a few minutes earlier. So the final moments of wakefulness are not recorded by a fully alert brain. They are recorded, if at all, by a brain that is already losing signal. This is why the memory disappears in such a strange way. It is not like watching a video and forgetting the ending. It is more like trying to record a video while the camera is dying in your hand. At first, the image is clear. Then the frame rate drops. Then the audio breaks. Then the screen freezes. Then the file corrupts before it can save. Not because nothing happened, because the equipment failed during the happening. That is what sleep onset does to memory. It does not wait until you are fully unconscious and then erase the tape. It weakens the recording process before the tape is ever made. And the thalamus is only one part of that collapse. The hippocampus, the structure deeply involved in turning experiences into long-term memories, is also changing state. During normal waking life, the hippocampus helps bind details together. Where you were, what you felt, what happened first, what happened next. It is one reason an experience becomes a memory instead of just a passing sensation. But during the transition into sleep, the hippocampus is no longer working in the same mode. It begins shifting away from fresh recording and toward the deeper work sleep is known for: sorting, tagging, strengthening, and discarding memory traces from the day. The brain is not focused on saving the moment of falling asleep. It is preparing to process everything that came before it. The editor has entered the room. And the editor is not interested in filming itself walking in. That is the brutal efficiency of the system. The cortex is getting less input. The hippocampus is moving away from encoding. The arousal systems are being suppressed. And the part of the brain most associated with self-monitoring, the prefrontal cortex, is beginning to lose its grip. This matters because the prefrontal cortex helps create the feeling that you are a coherent observer watching your own experience. It is part of what allows you to think, "I am here. I am awake. I am noticing this." But that is exactly the kind of function sleep does not preserve at full strength. As the prefrontal cortex quiets down, the narrator in your head gets softer. Not silent yet, just less stable. The thoughts become less organized. The sense of time becomes less reliable. The line between a real sound and an imagined one starts to blur. You may still think you are awake, but the you doing the thinking is already fading at the edges. This is the central trick. To remember falling asleep, you would need a witness. But the witness is part of the system being shut down. You would need the brain to observe its own disappearance, while the tools for observation are being removed one by one. Thalamus, closing the gate. Cortex, losing the stream. Hippocampus, stepping away from recording. Prefrontal cortex, dimming the sense of self. By the time sleep is close enough to catch, the catcher is already gone. And yet, the brain does not simply turn dark. That would be strange enough. But the real transition is even less clean. Because as the outside world fades, the inside world starts producing things of its own. Images, sounds, fragments, sensations that do not quite belong to the room. This is the next layer of the mystery. The brain has begun cutting you off from reality. But before consciousness disappears completely, it opens a strange little theater in the dark. This twilight state is called hypnagogia. Technically, it is stage 1 sleep, but that name makes it sound much cleaner than it really is. Because during hypnagogia, you are not fully awake, and you are not fully asleep. The thalamus has started closing the gate, but it has not closed it completely. The cortex is losing its supply of reality, but it is not silent yet, so the brain begins to improvise. You might see flashes of color, a face that vanishes as soon as it appears, a hallway you do not recognize, a shape drifting behind your eyes. Sometimes people hear a voice, a name, a piece of music, a sound that feels like it came from the room, even though nothing in the room made it. And then there is the classic one, the fall. You are drifting off, calm, heavy, almost gone. Then suddenly, your body jolts like it has just missed a step on a staircase that does not exist. That is called a hypnic jerk, or sleep start, and it is one of the clearest signs that falling asleep is not a smooth little fade-out. It is a messy negotiation between systems. Your muscles are relaxing because sleep is approaching. Your body is doing exactly what it is supposed to do, but some part of the nervous system may misread that sudden loss of muscle tension as danger, not rest. Falling, so it fires a fast emergency signal through the body. Catch yourself. Now, the result is ridiculous, but the logic behind it is cold. The brain would rather overreact to a false alarm than ignore a real one. And here is the strange part. Even when that jerk wakes you up, even when your whole body snaps back into awareness, you usually do not remember what came right before it. The images are gone. The sounds are gone. The strange little theater closes before you can describe the scene. This is because hypnagogic experiences are fragile. They are not built like normal waking memories. The hippocampus, the structure that helps turn experience into long-term memory, is already shifting away from clean recording. So the experience happens, but it does not stick. Night after night, your brain may produce fragments, colors, voices, falling sensations, half-dreams, and tiny impossible scenes. Then it destroys the tape. And this is where the original question becomes harder. Because the moment you fall asleep sounds like one moment. A line, a border, a switch. But sleep onset is not that simple. Different parts of the brain do not all go offline at the same time. Some regions can begin showing sleep-like activity, while others are still partly awake. Your auditory system may still catch sounds from the room. Your motor system may still be ready to move. But the frontal regions that help organize thought and self-awareness may already be fading. This is why you can nod off in a classroom, in a car, or during a long meeting, and come back with the weird feeling that you were both there and not there. Because, in a way, part of the brain was still listening, part of it had already left. So the exact instant of sleep is not just hard to remember. It may not exist in the way you imagine it. There may be no single frame where the brain says, "This is the moment." Instead, there is a slow, regional surrender. One system dims, then another, and by the time the part of you that says, "I am here," begins to disappear, the part that could record that disappearance has already stopped doing its job. The observer is the last thing to go, and it goes before it can write anything down. There is another unsettling layer. Sometimes people believe they were awake for most of the night, but sleep lab measurements show they were actually asleep. This is called sleep state misperception, or paradoxical insomnia. The brain can be in a measurable sleep state while the mind still reports a story of wakefulness. In other words, your brain's condition and your brain's narration of its condition can disagree. The machine can be entering sleep mode while the little voice inside insists. We are still awake, still thinking, still here, until even that voice steps away from the microphone. And then there is no announcement, no closing line, no witness, just absence. This is why you cannot remember falling asleep. Not because the transition is empty, but because the systems needed to witness it, organize it, and store it are being taken apart while it happens. The thalamus closes the gate. The cortex loses the stream. The hippocampus stops treating the present moment like something worth saving. The prefrontal cortex, the part that helps you feel like a stable self watching your own mind, fades. And somewhere in that fading, you vanish. Not forever, not dangerously, just nightly. For approximately 8 hours every 24, your subjective experience breaks, and you do not feel the break, because feeling absence would require the very consciousness that is absent. That is the final reversal. Sleep is not just rest. It is a controlled disappearance. Every night, you trade the memory of leaving for the ability to return. The brain decided this was worth it. 8 hours of absence in exchange for repair, sorting, consolidation, and a functional version of you in the morning. Memory of the transition was not included in the deal. So tonight, when you lie down, close your eyes and wait for sleep. You can try to catch it. You can try to notice the final thought, the final sound, the final second of being awake. But if the system works the way it is supposed to, you will fail. The lights will dim. The gate will close. The narrator will stop talking. And then, somehow, it will be morning.